Emily Windsnap, Chapter 7. Are you eating that or playing with it? Mom asked over the top of her glasses as I stirred my cereal, watching the milk turn brown and the flakes flayed into a soggy beige. What? Huh? Oh, sorry. I took a mouthful, then stirred some more. Mom had the Times spread out in front of her. She flipped through the pages, tutting every now and then, or frowning and pushing her glasses farther up her nose. How was I ever going to find out what was going on? It's not exactly the kind of thing that crops up naturally at Sunday breakfast. Oh, by the way, Mom, I've been meaning to ask. I don't suppose you married a merman, had his child, and then never saw him again? Or thought to tell your daughter about it? Huh? I squelched my cereal against the side of the bowl, splashing milk onto the table. Careful, sweetie. Mom pushed off a splash with the edge of her paper with her hand. Then she looked at me. Are you all right? It's not like you to ignore your breakfast. Fine. I got up and emptied the bowl into the sink. Emily? I ignored her as I sat back down at the table, pulled at my hair, winding around my fingers. Mom took her glasses off. That meant it was serious. Then she folded her arms. Double serious. I'm waiting, she said, her mouth tight and her eyes small. Emily, I said Why do you never talk about my dad? Mom jerked in her seat as though I'd punched her. What? You never talk about my father, I said, my voice coming out quieter this time. I don't know anything about him. It's as though he never existed. Mom put her glasses back on, and then she took them off again and got up. She turned on one of the gas burners, put the kettle on it, and gazed at the flickering flame. I don't know what to say, she murmured eventually. Why not start by telling me something about him? I want to. Darling, of course I want to. So how come you never have? Her eyes had gone all watery and she rubbed them with the sleeve of her sweater. I don't know. I just can't. I can't do it. If there's one thing I can't bear, it's Mom crying. Look, it's okay. I'm sorry. I got out of my seat and put my arms around her shoulders. It doesn't matter. But it does. She wiped her nose at the edge of the tablecloth. I want to tell you, but I can't. It's okay, Mom. Honest, you don't have to tell me. But I want to, she sobbed. I just can't remember. You can't remember? I let go and stared at her. You don't remember the man you married? She looked at me through bloodshot eyes. Well, yes. No, I mean sometimes. I think I remember things, but then it goes away again. Disappears. Disappears? Just like he did, she said quietly, her body shaking and her head in her hands. I can't even remember my own husband, your father. I'm a terrible mother. Don't start that, I sighed. You're a great mother. The best. Really? She smoothed down her skirt against her lap, and I forced myself to smile. She looked up and stroked my cheek with her thumb. I must have done something right with you, she said weakly. I stood up. Look, just forget it. It doesn't matter, okay? You deserve better than... Come on, Mom, it's all right, I said firmly. Hey, I think I'll go to the arcade, okay? She pinched my cheek. Munchkin, she sniffed. Pass me my purse. She handed me $2, and I headed up the stairs. I dawdled as I made my way past the video arcade. Not fair. Nothing was fair. I couldn't even waste a quarter on the skee ball. On top of everything else, I didn't need Mandy turning up and going after me just for being there. I bought some cotton candy from the end of the pier and wandered down to the boardwalk, my head filled with thoughts and questions. I didn't notice Mr. Beeston coming toward me. Watch yourself, he said as I nearly walked into him. Sorry, I was miles away. He smiled at me in that way that always gives me weird shivers in my neck and arms. One side of his mouth turned up, and the other reached down, and his crooked teeth poked out through the dark gap in between. How's Mom? He asked. That's when I had a thought. Mr. Beeston had been around a long time, and he was kind of friendly with Mom. Maybe he'd know something. She's not doing that great, actually, I said as I took a bite, the pink fluff melting into sugar in my mouth. Oh, why not? She's a bit sad about some things. Things? What things? He said quickly, his smile gone. Is she ill? What's the matter? Mr. Beeston's face turned hard as he narrowed his eyes at me. Well, my father... I pulled up my cotton candy, and a long piece came away like a loose thread from a fluffy pink ball of mohair yarn. I folded it over into my mouth. Your what? Mr. Beeston burst out. What was his problem? I was asking her about my father, and she got upset. He lowered his voice. What did she tell you? She didn't tell me anything. Nothing at all? She couldn't remember anything. Then she started crying. Couldn't remember anything? That's what she said? I nodded. You're quite sure now? Nothing at all? Yes, nothing. All right then. Mr. Beeston breathed out hard through his nose. It made a low whistling sound. So I wondered if you could help me, I continued, trying to sound casual. Me? How on earth can I help you? He snapped. I just wondered if she ever talked to you about him, with you being her friend and everything. He examined my face, squeezing his eyes down into narrow slits as he stared. I wanted to run away. Of course he wouldn't know anything. Why would she talk to him and not me? I tried to hold his eyes, but he was staring at me so hard I had to look away. He took hold of me by my elbow and pointed up the promenade with his other hand. I think it's time you and I had a little chat, he said. I tried to shake my elbow away as we walked, but he held it tighter and tighter and walked faster. We'd gotten all the way to the end of the boardwalk before he let go and motioned for me to sit down on a bench. Now listen to me, and listen well, because I'll tell you this once and once only. I waited. And I don't want you bothering your mother with it afterwards. You've upset her enough already. But Never mind. He raised his hand to stop me. You couldn't have known. He wiped his forehead with a hanky. Now then, he said, shifting his weight onto his side as he put his hanky away. His trousers had a hole just below the pocket. Your father and I, we used to be friends. Best friends. Some folks even thought we were brothers. That's how close we were. Brothers? Surely Mr. Beeston was lots older than my father. I opened my mouth to speak. He was like a kid brother to me. We did everything together. Like what? What? What things did you do? I want to know what he was like. All the things young boys get up to, he snapped. We went fishing together. We went on our bikes. Motorbikes? Yes, motorbikes, mountain bikes, all of that. We were best friends. Chased the girls together, too. Imagining Mr. Beeston chasing girls, I shuddered. He cleared his throat. Then, of course, he met your mother and things changed. Changed? How? Well, one might say they fell in love. At least she did, very much so. And what about my dad? He did a very good impression of love for a while. He certainly didn't want to fool around with cars anymore. I thought you said he liked bikes. Cars, bikes, whatever. He wasn't interested. They spent all their time together. Mr. Beeston stared in the distance, his hands in his pockets. He looked as though he was struggling with something. Then he jingled his coins and said, But of course it didn't last. Your father turned out not to be the gentleman we had all believed he was. What do you mean? This is a rather delicate matter, but I shall tell you. Let us just say he wasn't the most responsible person. He was happy enough to lead your mother up the garden path, but not prepared to stay by her side when they got to the gate. Huh? His face reddened. He was content to sow but not reap. Mr. Beeston, I don't know what you're talking about. Good grief, child. I'm talking about responsibility, he snapped. Where do you think you came from? Do you mean he got my mom pregnant with me and then ran off? Yes, that's what I mean. Well, why don't you say so then, I wanted to say. But I didn't dare. Mr. Beeston just looked angry. So he left her? I asked just to make sure I'd got it right. Yes, he left her, he replied through tight lips. Where did he go? That's just it. No one ever heard from him again. The strain was obviously too much for him, he said sarcastically. What strain? Fatherhood, good-for-nothing slacker, never willing to grow up and take responsibility. Mr. Beeston looked away. What he did, it was despicable, his voice becoming raspy. I'll never forgive him. He got up from the bench, his face hard and set. Never, he repeated. Something about the way he said it made me hope I'd never get on his wrong side. I followed him as we carried on along the boardwalk. Didn't anybody try to find him? Find him? Mr. Beeston looked at me, but it was as though he was seeing right through me. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. Find him? He repeated. Yes, of course we tried. No one could have done more than I did. I traveled around for weeks, putting up posters. We even had a message on the radio begging him to come home and meet his daughter? Mr. Beeston didn't reply. So he never even saw me? Well, we did everything we could. I looked down at the wide boards of the promenade, trying to take in what I'd heard. It couldn't be true, could it? A young couple ambled toward us, the man holding a baby up in the air and the woman laughing, a spaniel jumping up in between them. Farther down, an elderly couple were walking slowly against the wind, arms linked. I think I need to go now, I said. We'd walked all the way around to the lighthouse. Mr. Beeston pulled me back by my arm. You're not to talk to your mother about this. Do you hear me? Why not? You saw what happened. It's far too painful for her. He tightened his grip, his fingers biting into my arm. Promise me you won't mention it. I didn't say anything. Mr. Beeston looked hard into my eyes. People can block things out completely if the memory is too much to cope with. That's a scientific fact. There'll be all sorts of trouble if you try to make talk about this. He pulled on my arm, his face inches from mine. And you don't want trouble, do you? He said in a whisper. I shook my head. Do you? He repeated with another yank on my arm. No, of course not. My voice wobbled. He smiled his wonky smile at me and then let go of my arm. Good, he said. Good. Now I will be seeing you when I come over this afternoon. I'm going out, I said quickly. I'll think of something to do. I couldn't cope with Sunday coffee with Mom and Mr. Beeston, especially now. Very well. Tell your mother I'll be over there at 3 o'clock. Yeah. We stood by the lighthouse. For a moment, I had a vision of him throwing me inside and locking me in. Why would he do that? He'd never done anything to hurt me before today. I rubbed my arm. I could still feel the pinch of his fingers digging into my skin. But it was nothing compared to the disappointment I felt in my chest. Jake wasn't my father after all, if Mr. Beeston was to be believed, and he had no reason to lie, did he? Nothing made sense anymore. Now let's see, where's that? Mr. Beeston talked to himself as he fumbled with his keys. He had about 5 key rings rattling on a long chain. But then he gasped. What? What's wrong? He ignored me. It can't be missing. It can't be. He felt in his pants pockets, pulling the insides out and shaking it out of his kerchief. It was here. I'm sure it was. The lighthouse key? No, not the lighthouse key. He stopped fumbling and looked up at me as if he'd only just remembered I was there, his eyes dark and hard. You're still here, he said. Go on, leave me alone. But don't forget our chat. It's between you and me. Remember, you don't want to cause any trouble. Then he unlocked the lighthouse door. I've got some important things to do, he said. Squinting into my eyes, he added, I'll see you again soon. For some reason, it sounded like a threat. Before I had a chance to say anything else, he'd slipped inside and shut the door behind him. A second later, a bolt slid across. As I turned to leave, I kicked something up in the dust. It glinted at me. A key ring. I picked it up. There was a brass plate on the ring with crystals around the edges. There was a picture of a pitchfork or something engraved on one side. 2 keys hung from the ring, one big chunky one and the other a little metal one, same as Mom has for our suitcase. A tiny gold chain hung from the plate. A clasp at its other end was broken and open. I banged on the lighthouse door and waited. Mr. Beeston, I called. I banged once more. Nothing. I looked at the keyring again, running my fingers over its crystal edge. Oh well, I could always give it back another time. I buttoned the keyring into my pocket and headed home. All right, now that you're finished reading chapter 7, you want to take some notes on what you read. First of all, who's in the text? What characters did we see in this text? And what's happening to them in the text? Then you want to ask yourself, what seems important? What seems like really important about what happened in the text? And then how does this connect to what you're learning about the problem and what you read previously? Make sure you jot these down in your notebook.